Hello, I'm Alison Lagrange. A very warm welcome from Durban, South Africa. We get you the news and the newsmakers from Africa. From elections to climate change to innovations and opportunities. As the world's attention shifts, we report from Africa, the heart of the global South. Join me every weekday live on First Post. Hello and welcome to First Post Africa, where we get you the top stories from the continent and from across the world. I'm Alison Lagrange, coming to you live from Durban, South Africa. First, let's take a look at the headlines. Australia expels Iran's ambassador, accusing Tehran of involvement in anti-Semitic arson attacks in Sydney and Melbourne. Iran has rejected the allegations and has warned of reciprocal action. China rejects Japan's protest over gas field development in disputed East China Sea waters, saying it does not accept Tokyo's groundless accusations. A Sri Lankan court grants bail to the former President Ranil Wickremesinghe, who was arrested last week over allegations of misusing state funds while in office. Botswana declares a public health emergency, with the president saying the national medical supply chain has collapsed due to depleted state funds and steep cuts in US aid. And the death toll from Typhoon Kajiki rises to 3 in Vietnam as rescue workers battle uprooted trees, downed power lines and severe flooding that has brought chaos to the streets of Hanoi. Hello and welcome. Thousands around the world are protesting against the dire humanitarian situation and starvation in Gaza as Israel intensifies its campaign against Hamas in the Palestinian enclave. Pro-Palestinian sentiment is now gaining momentum in Africa, including some of Israel's allies and those that have so far not outrightly condemned Israel's campaign in Gaza. Kenya is among them, where hundreds joined a motorcade rally in solidarity with Palestinians. Dozens of riders and bikers took to the Nairobi streets, calling for an end to the war and denouncing the humanitarian crisis. The protest came after the United Nations warned that more than 500,000 people, mostly children, are trapped in famine conditions in Gaza, a crisis made worse by Israeli restrictions on aid.
The genocide in Palestine has to stop. Children are dying, women are suffering, they're bombing hospitals and residential areas. And Israel is basically wants to extinguish the existence of Palestinians. And we as active citizens, we are here to call out the Israeli and all its supporters and demanding for the freedom of the Palestinian people.
But pro-Gaza protests in Kenya have so far been limited in scale, often facing government crackdowns. Police have used tear gas and made arrests to disperse demonstrators in the past. Kenya is one of Israel's biggest allies in Africa. President William Ruto has affirmed solidarity with Israel even after the Gaza war, while still maintaining support for a two-state solution. President Ruto has also emphasized Israel's right to self-defense, and Kenya has abstained from UN votes demanding Israel end its occupation. Nairobi is now also set to receive a $26 million loan from Israel to acquire the Spider missile defense system, a move aimed at countering regional threats such as Al-Shabaab. But Ruto's position has drawn criticism at home, with opponents warning of a pro-Israel bias and questioning Kenya's diplomatic balance in West Asia. Many Kenyans, especially among the Muslim community, have long identified with the Palestinian struggle, drawing parallels with their own history of resistance.
What you can see happening in Gaza right now and what happened in Africa is basically the same, because they are going through occupation, we went through colonization, we share the same colonial masters.
The sentiment was also evident in Senegal, where lawmakers, civil society groups and rights activists marched, chanting "No to genocide" and "Boycott Israel." Some called on their government to sever ties with Israel. Others urged world leaders to revive talks toward a two-state solution.
We expect at the national level that the Senegalese government breaks diplomatic relations with Israel. We also want international opinion, starting with Arab countries, to unite against Israel so that Palestinians can be independent, recover their land, and the war stops. Western countries must also respect UN charters and give Palestinians back their rights.
In South Africa, one of Israel's most vocal critics, demonstrators took to the streets in support of their government's case at the International Court of Justice, accusing Israel of genocide. Pretoria has led the charge, demanding expulsion of Israeli diplomats in 2023 and pushing the African Union to strip Israel of observer status. Its illegal moves inspired other nations to adopt stronger pro-Palestinian positions. However, South Africa's own government faces domestic criticism, as coal exports to Israel have continued despite the war. As of January 2025, coal shipments to Israel had reportedly grown by 17% compared to the year before, prompting protesters to demand an end to all trade ties. So the rising anger over the humanitarian disaster in Gaza and continued Israeli military action has highlighted the divide between public sentiment in Africa and the nuanced balancing stances of their governments. From protests over the war in Gaza, let's turn our attention to a decades-old regional conflict in Africa, the Western Sahara dispute. Now, Morocco has been at loggerheads with Algeria, which backs the Polisario Front and its fight for independence of Western Sahara, a territory that is mostly controlled by Morocco. And in a bid to crack down on Polisario's movement, the kingdom is now lobbying the Trump administration to designate Polisario Front as a terrorist organization. Rabat has signed a $405,000 contract with a firm close to the Trump administration to get Polisario's activities criminalized and cut off its sources of support. Back in June, a bill was also introduced in the U.S. Congress to consider labeling Polisario as a terrorist organization. Now, Western Sahara is a vast, sparsely populated desert region in northwest Africa. It stretches across 272,000 square kilometers and is bordered by Morocco in the north, Algeria in a small northeastern patch, and by Mauritania in the east and south. It also has a long coast with the Atlantic Ocean in the west and northwest. The region is rich in phosphates and other minerals and has a lucrative fishing industry on its Atlantic coast. This former Spanish colony is home to the nomadic indigenous Sahrawi tribe. For decades, Morocco has claimed control over Western Sahara, while the ethnic Sahrawi fight for their right to self-determination. In 2007, Morocco proposed a plan to grant Western Sahara limited autonomy, which allowed the Sahrawis to run their government, but under Moroccan sovereignty. Now, the Polisario rejected these plans and has continued to call for independence. Algeria, which has recognized the self-declared Sahrawi Republic, also opposed the Moroccan proposal and cut diplomatic ties with Morocco in 2021 over the dispute. Now, earlier this month, Trump reaffirmed his support for Morocco's sovereignty over the Western Sahara. He also promoted Morocco's autonomy plan for Western Sahara as the sole solution to the disputed region. Trump's support for Morocco dates back to 2020, when the US became the first country to recognize Moroccan sovereignty over Western Sahara. This was a concession of sorts for Morocco for normalizing ties with Israel as a part of the Abraham Accords signed during Trump's first term. In June this year, Britain became the third permanent member of the UNSC to back Morocco's autonomy plan after the US and France. Algeria, on the other hand, has refused to take part in roundtables convened by the UN envoy to Western Sahara. Algiers instead insists on holding a referendum with independence as an option. Will peacemaker Trump be able to resolve the Western Sahara dispute? Only time will tell. But one thing is clear, Trump's apparent peacemaking efforts in Algeria and other African nations are a part of his larger push to access Africa's mineral wealth while countering rising Chinese influence in the continent. And staying on with North Africa, where Libya's military administration, led by Field Marshal Khalifa Haftar, is strengthening ties with neighboring Egypt. The commander-in-chief of the Libyan National Army, Khalifa Haftar, received Egypt's intelligence chief, Major General Hassan Rashad, in Benghazi. Now, the two sides discussed security and intelligence cooperation, as well as wider regional coordination. According to the Libyan statement, the talks focused on enhancing coordination to support regional stability and to protect mutual strategic interests. But the Egyptian side has not released any official statement on the meeting. The visit highlights the ongoing security cooperation between Egypt and Libya's eastern Benghazi-based administration led by Haftar. Since 2014, Libya has been divided, with Haftar and the House of Representatives controlling the east, and the Tripoli-based government of national unity, headed by Abdul Hamid Dbeibeh, holding power in the west. The United Nations has long sought to unify Libya's military institutions and is still mediating talks aimed at organizing long-delayed national elections to end the political deadlock. This began after the 2011 NATO-backed overthrow of longtime dictator Muammar Gaddafi. Now, Egypt publicly engages with the Tripoli government at international forums. But behind the scenes, its strongest partnership remains with Haftar and the Eastern administration. Cairo sees Haftar's Libyan National Army, which controls territory along the Libya-Egypt border, as a crucial buffer against terror groups, Islamist militias, and weapons smuggling. Egypt has consistently backed Haftar with training, intelligence, and logistical support. And this support was most visible during Haftar's failed 2019 offensive to capture Tripoli. The Libyan conflict also reflects broader regional rivalries. The Tripoli-based GNU is recognized by the UN, but is backed heavily by Turkey, which has deployed troops and Syrian fighters to defend it. Egypt, which had been a long-time rival of Turkey, has backed the opposite camp, and Libya has remained a key testing ground for their competing influence. Even after recent steps towards reconciliation between Ankara and Cairo, Libya remains a delicate arena where their strategic interests collide, and the outcome could shape the balance of power across North Africa. And for our last story today, let's turn our attention to the Sahel nations. The junta-led Burkina Faso and Mali skipped a Pan-African defense meet hosted by Nigeria. Niger was the only Sahel nation present at the defense talks, hosted in Nigeria's capital Abuja on Monday. The talks are set to run through Wednesday and are aimed at finding homegrown solutions to Africa's defense needs. However, the absence of Burkina Faso and Mali at the meeting highlights the growing tensions between the junta-led Sahel nations and their West African neighbors. Earlier this year, in January, Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger exited the regional bloc ECOWAS and formed their own alliance of Sahel states. This major breakup came after more than a year of diplomatic tensions. Now, relations soured between ECOWAS and the Sahel nations after military seized power in Mali in 2020, in Burkina Faso in 2022, and in Niger in 2023. ECOWAS pressed for restoration of democratic rule in the Sahel nations, but the juntas were reluctant to comply. Now, after the Niger coup, ECOWAS imposed crippling sanctions on the country. This included border closures, a no-fly zone for all commercial flights, and the freezing of central bank assets. The bloc also threatened to forcefully restore democratic rule in the country. However, the bloc's repeated attempts to restore democracy only hardened the resolve of the junta-led countries to exit ECOWAS. Burkina Faso and Mali criticized the bloc sanctions on Niger as inhumane and vowed to defend the country. Now, the three junta-led countries also accused ECOWAS of siding with Western powers, and as an alternative, the Sahel nations have pivoted toward Russia. Though Moscow provides these Sahel nations with weapons and mercenaries, terrorism and insurgency is on the rise in these countries. Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger are three poor and landlocked countries, and their economies depend on their West African neighbors. Now, this is the reason why even after exiting ECOWAS, the Sahel nations have not closed their borders. The exit of the three junta-led nations has also impacted ECOWAS. The bloc is considered as Africa's most important regional group, but the exit of the three poorest member states has made ECOWAS look even more like a loser in this conflict. But the ones who are bearing the brunt of this regional conflict are the civilians who are facing regular terrorist attacks. And as tensions continue to rise between the Sahel nations and their neighbors, countering the violence in the region seems even more elusive. And that's it on the show for today. We will see you again tomorrow at the same time. Thank you for watching, and goodbye.